If you clicked on this video, we're going to be talking about dividends. Woohoo! Today I'm going to give you a very quick crash course on everything that you need to know. In this video, it's going to start off very easy and very basic. And then as the video progresses, I'm going to escalate into the harder stuff. If you're finding it a little bit too basic for you, just skip along. And then the stuff that you probably are struggling to understand, you'll probably have explained it towards the end of the video. Let's just say that yourself and a few friends, you decided to buy a house together. And just for simplicity's sake, let's just say that there's no mortgages involved and between you and your friends, you had all the money to buy the house outright. So with the rental income, what will happen there is that you'd add it all up together for the year, and then you deduct all your council fees, and then whatever money is left over, you can then divide between yourself and all your friends equally for whoever had the shares in the house. This is very different to growth, where say if you bought the house, but then a year later there was a booming real estate market and appreciated by $100,000, that would not be a dividend because that is unrealized capital gains, or it is just basically growth. The dividend is basically the cash flow from the business, which is different from growth, which is how much the business has appreciated in value for what people are willing to buy for the business. This is basically the principle for what a dividend is with a share, except instead of owning 1/5 of it or half of it, you own 1% of 1% of 1% of the share of a company. And with these dividends, they're paid out either 1, 2, or 4 times per year, depending on which company you've purchased shares in. And as we all know, shares are bought and sold on a regular basis. So how do they reward the people that actually own the shares as opposed to people who are just sort of day trading with the shares and then rewarding the wrong people of the cash flow? Well, they do this by picking a day, and they call this the Ex-Dividend date. So this is the day that they actually look at to say who owns the shares will receive the dividends. So as an example, let's just say that person A owns shares in a company, and then on the morning of the ex-dividend date, they decided to sell to somebody else. So who would actually receive the dividend in that situation? Well, on the ex-dividend date, they'd look at whoever owns the share in the morning. So in this case, it'll be the seller. And so then they would receive the dividend in a month or two's time later. And that's something else that I should mention with the dividends as well. With the dividend dates, you'll be told about what the amount is and when you're getting it in for the date that you need to own the share, but the money will not actually land into your account until about 1 or 2 months later. Don't worry, this is normal. And I bet there are some creative people watching this right now thinking, well, I could just buy the shares on the day before the ex-dividend date and then just own the shares for 2 days and then wait for the ex-dividend date to pass and then sell the shares afterwards. However, there is a minor flaw in this plan. And the minor flaw in this plan is that you're not the first person to think of this. So if you did attempt to do this, you'd find that the shares would increase in value by pretty much the exact amount of the dividend. And then after the ex-dividend date has passed, they'll fall by that exact amount of the dividend. That is a basic explanation of how dividends are paid out. And one thing I want to warn many investors about is not to chase the high dividend companies. And there's a reason for this. When a company receives its cash flow every year, they basically have a bit of a choice on what to do with that cash flow. So on one hand, they can actually reinvest the profit or the cash flow into developing future products and expanding the business empire. Or option 2 is that they can give it out to the shareholders. Now most normal businesses sort of find a mix between the two where they reward the current shareholders and they allow for a bit of expenditure for growing the business further. However, there are some morality challenged CEOs that know that investors just love dividends. So then what they do is they look at all the cash flow and all the money, and then instead of reinvesting it into the business, they pay all of it in the dividends in the hope of attracting more investors. However, in the long term, these companies will be overtaken by their competitors who are actually investing in growing the business. In fact, when you look at some of the most successful companies in America, say Apple and Tesla, for example, and Berkshire Hathaway, you'll find that they do not pay a dividend at all. And that has been part of the reason for the astronomical growth. And for the companies that did pay high dividends, they're referred to as dividend traps because you'll find that the dividend will be high every year, but they have virtually no capital appreciation. The shares will just hold their value, and eventually the value will be eroded away with inflation. How do you know if you're looking at a dividend trap? Well, it's pretty complicated to actually analyze this properly, but one of the first red flags that will be give one away is if the dividend is more than 6%. If the dividend is more than 6%, this could be a little bit of an early warning, but not a guarantee, but a potential red flag that the company you're looking at is a dividend trap. So congratulations on making it through this far in the video. And now we're going to get into something really exciting. They're called franking credits, and they exist only in Australia. So if you're not from Australia and you're watching this, the rest of this video will not really apply to you. So with a franking credit, this is basically a system that was put in the 80s, and it was to prevent shareholders from being taxed twice on the dividend income. Let's just say that you had a share in a company, you're entitled to $1,000 in dividends every year. What would happen is that the company that is issuing out the dividend, they'd actually put $300 aside as a franking credit and then give you the $700 in cash. And when it comes to tax time, instead of having to pay the tax on that $700, the government will see that the company's held aside $300 as a franking credit, and then they'll say, okay, the tax for that has already been paid, so you get to keep the entire $700 that you've already received. However, it doesn't always work out perfectly like this, but that is the ideal game plan of how the system is supposed to work. If you're earning a lot of money, you'll be having to pay a lot more tax because of the diminishing returns of the tax brackets. And so the franking credit will probably not cover the amount of tax that you're required to pay. However, if you're not earning anything or if you're retired, you'll find that the franking credit will actually be way too much, and then your tax return, you'll get a massive income from the government in the form of a tax return. That brings me to retirees. With retirees, they've built up their share portfolio throughout their careers, and now they live off the dividend incomes as a passive cash flow in their retirement years. And when it comes to their tax return time, they actually receive a second injection when they get their tax return. Now, in the 2019 election, there was one of the political parties that were proposing scrapping franking credits, but this party lost by a bit of a landslide and it was a major election issue. So I think franking credits will be here to stay for a long time now because of that very election. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope that explained everything that you're wondering about dividends. And don't forget to, yeah, you know the drill.